So, hello and welcome back, everyone, to the 2019 Small Farms Winter Webinar Series hosted by the University of Illinois Extension's Local Food Systems and Small Farm team. This is Zach Rannigan, Local Food Small Farms Educator up here in Cook County. We appreciate you joining us for these webinars, and we're going to do our best to begin and end within the space of this lunch hour. It's a tight time frame and a timely topic, and I know we're going to have lots of questions. So please understand that we're going to limit your questions to the text box, and you can access the text box by clicking on that icon in the bottom left-hand corner. I will do my best to make sure the presenter answers them at the end, or if myself or the other educators on the call can answer the questions in the chat box. I've also attached in the emails you've received a preliminary information sheet about the current industrial hemp rules for Illinois, put together by our commercial ag educator, Philip Alberti. Philip and his commercial ag team, as well as myself and the local foods and small farms team, are following the rules around this emerging crop closely, so be on the lookout for future resources and programming from U of I Extension. This presentation is being recorded, and I will email a link to the archived presentation as soon as possible after it concludes. There will also be a short link for a very brief online evaluation for this presentation, and we would very much appreciate your feedback to improve the content of this series. This week's speaker is Thomas Keene from the University of Kentucky. Tom has been a forage agronomist at the University of Kentucky since 2005. We worked primarily with statewide meetings and research around forages and forage production with hay, pasture, and biomass production. In May of 2016, Tom accepted a position as the extension specialist in industrial hemp production with the University of Kentucky Colleges of Ag, Food, and Environment. He's now working with industrial hemp, focusing on sustainable agronomic practices and its many opportunities for Kentucky farmers. We're looking forward to learning the lessons from Kentucky now 5 years into their industrial hemp program. So with that, I'll let Tom go ahead and take it away. Thanks, Tom.
Zach, thank you so much for having me today. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be with you folks. We do have 5 years under our belt, and we've learned a few things, but we've got a lot more to learn, and there's no question about that. But I always tell farmers when I visit with them that our learning curve on industrial hemp will be much steeper than it's been with other crops, primarily because of our technology that we have available nowadays and also the communication that we have. So while we've still got a lot to learn, we'll get there much more quickly than we have in some of our other crops that we've been researching now for 75 or 80 years. So we'll move on. Anytime I do a presentation for our farmers here in Kentucky, I always start with our webpage. If you're like me, you go to a meeting, and after you leave there, you'll think, now, what did that presenter say about this or say about that? So I always like to leave a location where you can go and find some of those answers. This is our University of Kentucky Hemp webpage. You can see some information on there. In the lower left-hand corner are our current 2018 research reports. You can log on to that and look at some of our yield trials for our fiber and our dual purpose crops. And then there's a link in the very middle about a presentation that Dr. Williams did, Introduction to Hemp and Hemp Agronomy. So if you find yourself needing some answers later on, this is a good place to go. But this website right here is probably the most important one you can have in your archives. This is our Kentucky Department of Agriculture hemp webpage, and it is by far, as far as I'm concerned, the most comprehensive source of information on growing industrial hemp that we have, not only in Kentucky, but probably nationwide. And they just do a phenomenal job. Commissioner Comer, who's now a congressman in Western Kentucky, has got the ball rolling here in Kentucky. Commissioner Quarles now has taken up the banter and is doing a great job. But in the lower right-hand corner, it's kind of hard to see now because I had to cut some of that off, but many links there for questions on regulatory issues, varieties to grow, processors, just application responsibilities and those kind of things. So a tremendously good website. We get calls, myself and Dr. Williams, on a daily basis on industrial hemp, and we get them from Kentucky, but we get them from many other states, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, you name it. We get them from all over the country, and we're always happy to visit with folks and impart what we know. But about 90% of the time, I direct folks to this website because there's just so much good information on here. And so this is one you really want to keep archived so that you can get to tons of information. Just go to that lower right-hand corner for all those links. Now, this next slide is a slide. You can see Dr. Williams on the left there explaining some of hemp agronomy to some of our state legislators and some of our administrative folks here within the college. This was early on back in 2015. Here he's talking to Senator Mitch McConnell. Many of you probably know Senator McConnell. He's a Senate Majority Leader in the Senate today, and so we're very fortunate to have him here. He has been a true champion of industrial hemp and industrial hemp production, not only here in Kentucky but around the country. He was very instrumental in getting legislation passed in 2014, and then on the Farm Bill that just passed in December 2018, he himself was on the committee to try to make sure that the new Farm Bill had language in it addressing industrial hemp and industrial hemp production. Again, you can see Dr. Williams trying to explain the difference between a male and a female hemp plant there. This picture was taken on the same day. This is what I call my heavy hitters photo. On the left, we have Dr. Nancy Cox. She is the Dean of the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. Next to her is Dr. Eli Capilouto, who is the president of the University of Kentucky. Again, Dr. Williams there. On the other side of the sign, you see Senator McConnell. And then at that time, it was Commissioner Jamie Comer. Again, I mentioned he's now as a legislator from Western Kentucky. We've had many field days here in Kentucky talking about hemp and hemp production. You can see we get quite good attendance when we have our field days. We have our field plots. People are very interested to come out to see those. We'll also have some programs under the tent. We'll have posters and that kind of thing. And again, you can see we draw a very, very nice sized crowd with that. And I really just show you these pictures more as a visual thing because I want you to understand that I have never been involved with a crop, forage crop, energy crop, that type of thing, that has had more interest across all sectors of society than industrial hemp. If you are the age of 18 or older, if you read the newspaper, if you go online to get your news, if you read blogs, if you have social media presence with Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of those kind of things, you have heard of industrial hemp, especially in the last, say, 6 to 12 months. So it is out there. Everybody knows about hemp, and there's a lot of good information out there, but unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation. Everybody's heard about it, and everybody seems to be an expert on it. So I always caution farmers to be a little bit careful where they get their information because there's just so much out there. There's so much written, some valid and some invalid. So I just caution folks to be careful, but there's no question that there's more interest in this crop than any crop I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. I've kind of coined a new phrase. When I do my presentations with farmers and agents and that kind of thing, I always say, hemp is hot and hemp is happening. This is the Hemp Industries Association. This is we have a state chapter here in Kentucky, and then, of course, there's the national chapter. I show you this just because every week I get an email listing these different things that are out in the press, both on a national level, state level, and that kind of thing. There's always at least 10 to 12 new articles on TV, again, papers around the country and that kind of thing. So it is out there. It's getting tons and tons of press. Again, we started in 2014 with the Farm Bill. We got quite a little bit. And it kind of waned a little bit. But now, since the passage of the new Farm Bill in December of last year, that has picked right back up. This is the plant we're talking about, this little plant on the right. It's a very fragile seedling, but given the opportunity, it can grow into a very bushy, big, tall plant. And so it's quite the producer if everything goes well. So as we look back over 5 years here in Kentucky and some of the things we've done and learned, you can see the first year in 2014 when the pilot project was passed on a national level. We had a lot of issues with getting seed here into Kentucky with the Drug Enforcement Agency. We finally got some of that seed in the ground, but we planted very few acres. Really, 2015 is where the rubber hit the road. We had about 121 approved participants. You can see most of those were growers, 20-some processors, 8 university projects going on. these next three numbers are pretty important, I think. 1,700 acres approved. The Kentucky Department of Agriculture approved those acres, but only about half of those were actually planted. And then when we look at the acres harvested, again, we're about half of those acres that were planted. So what's approved, what's planted, and what's harvested, even up until today, there's always quite a big discrepancy in those numbers. We look at 2016, again, we had a lot more applications received, 139 growers. We were up to 42 processors. That's very important. We have someone to process the hemp if we grow it. Again, we approved 4,600 acres. That was up from the 1,700 from the year before. And you can see the university projects and so forth. But you can see, a pretty marked increase. Of that 4,600 that was approved, only half of that, again, was planted. Quite a bit of that was in greenhouses. And then this is how things broke down planting-wise in terms of what was planted. About 60% for floral material or CBDs, 34% for grain and or seed, and about 6% for fiber. And of course, when we got started, there had been no production here in the country, the United States, so we had to import our seed from foreign countries. You can see those numbers there. When you look at the breakdown of how this acreage has been planted, people here in Kentucky have been fostering this idea of a hemp program coming back online for several years, prior to 2014. And if you talk to those folks that were leading the charge back even before we got the legislation, I think most of them would tell you that their prediction was that the bulk of the acres planted would be for grain and fiber. But because of this great interest in CBD, CBD oil, and those kind of things, you can see that that's quite a bit different than what folks had originally planned on, I do believe. 2017, again, almost 13,000 acres approved, more applicants, more growers, about the same number of processors. Only about a fourth of those acres were planted. One reason being that we had a farmer in western Kentucky that had hopes of planting about 4,000 acres. That did not come to fruition, and so he only planted about 900 acres. So if you put 3,000 back in there that he did not plant, that gets us about back to our 50% acreage is planted. Again, you can see that breakdown for CBD, grain, and fiber remained pretty steady from 2016, 2017. 2018, again, you can see those acreages have gone up. Again, about the same number of growers. The breakdown of CBD and grain and fiber about the same, but I'd like to take a moment just to get you to look at this number of processors we've got here, 72 in 2018. I'm not trying to be boastful or anything, but I do believe that we here in Kentucky, have the best overall industrial hemp program in the country. We don't have maybe the highest number of acres, and I'll confirm that here shortly. But when you look at the number of acres planted, when you look at the Kentucky Department of Agriculture's regulatory program, how it's administered and how it's been a model for many other states, if you look at our university research with our many universities here in Kentucky, and then you look at this number of processors, you put all those components together, and I think you really get a sense of how complete our program is here in Kentucky. But when you fill out an application to grow industrial hemp, on that application, you have to put on there who is going to process your hemp. And so for states starting out, having those processors to take that hemp from the farmer is very, very important. And I know that's something that you'll be addressing, certainly in the state of Illinois. If you wanted to grow hemp in 2019, you had to have your application in prior to November 30th of 2018. These are some of the numbers from applications that came in. Again, you can see a tremendous increase in applicants, a little over 200 to over 1,000. You can see that we went from about 16,000 acres to 45,000 acres requested. We have hemp in almost 100 counties. We have 120 counties here in Kentucky. And so we have hemp will be grown in almost 100 counties this year in 2019. Again, you can see the breakdown with a floral material, fiber, and for grain. Processors, again, I can't stress how important this is. 41 new processor applications. So that's phenomenal. We're excited about that. We have what we call the very large industrial processors that have invested significant funds, millions or tens of millions of dollars into their processing facilities and so forth. We have many what we call artisan processors that are doing small batch stuff, geared for farmers markets and local markets and craft shops and those kind of things. So we're very fortunate to have that right there. So again, large increase in potential growers as well as processors. Now, I've got a few slides here coming up that just are visuals for you. The counties in green are counties that produced hemp in 2015. So we had a cluster right there in central Kentucky, a couple in eastern Kentucky, west central, we had a few. The little dots were processors at that time. And then you can see the emblems for the different universities that were doing research projects, again, from far eastern Kentucky to far western Kentucky. In 2016, that map begins to fill in quite a little bit. You can see more processors with the red dots, more university symbols there for universities that were doing it. Again, about half the counties, 60 out of 120 counties, had farmers growing it in Kentucky. We go to 2017, that map fills in even more. I give this slide and show this slide. I like to say, we grow it from far western Kentucky, very far western Kentucky, all the way to eastern Kentucky. We grow it from northern Kentucky to the Tennessee border. So I encourage farmers that we can grow hemp in any county in Kentucky. Hemp likes good soils and well-drained soils and those kind of things. So eastern Kentucky is more mountainous, it's more forested, so we don't look for there to be a lot of hemp in eastern Kentucky. But there will be some smaller plots there, and there will be some research going on and so forth. But again, the bulk of it will probably be from I-75 west. Again, 2018, that condensed a little bit, but you can still see it's statewide for sure. Now, these next couple of slides I want to pay some pretty close attention to. These come from an organization called Vote Hemp, and these are some maps and some numbers that talk about the legislation around the country. You can see in 2017, Illinois would be in white, so no program there, along with some other states. You can see Kentucky that would be brown and a star in it, means that we were up and had been doing it for quite a while. You can see to the right of that, you can see 40 states at that point in time had enacted legislation to grow industrial hemp, but some of the states in the lighter brown, even though they had passed legislation, were not growing it. Now, if you look down at the total acres planted in 2017, you can see that 25,000 acres were planted nationwide. It's very hard to see the numbers in the columns there, again, from the different states. But suffice it to say, 19 states planted 25,000 acres in 2017. We go to the next slide. We look at 2018. And again, this is from Vote Hemp. You can see some more states have come online. You see that Illinois is now blue. But you can see those acreages have increased quite a bit. We were at 25,000 plus. So now we're at 78,000 acres. So basically a threefold increase from 2017 to 2018. And so if we think about 2019 and maybe even forward thinking to 2020, if we get a threefold increase in 2019 from all the states, that would put us up close to 250,000 acres planted nationwide. And then if we surmise that would be the case again in 2020, we'd be pushing close to 1 million acres of hemp nationwide. Now, if we think back to those slides where I showed you how much of this is being planted for CBDs and so forth, the question comes, when does the market become saturated? That's a very, very important question. The one thing I do believe is that this will be a commodity crop as we go further down the road. And the one thing that the Kentucky farmer does well, the Illinois farmer does well and the American farmer does well is we produce. Once we get something under our belt, once we get the knowledge on how to do it, we are producers. So we will produce enough of whatever it is, whether it's the CBDs, whether it's the fiber, or it's the grain, to make sure that we drive that price down. Most of you are probably familiar with the fact that if corn goes to $8 a bushel in this country, we plant enough corn to drive the price back to $4 a bushel. And if soybeans go to $17 a bushel, we plant enough soybeans to drive it back to $8 or $9 a bushel. If the lucrative money is in the CBDs, we will plant enough to drive it back to where it's only marginally profitable. And that might leave room for more fiber and grain. So anyway, I just wanted to touch base with you on those numbers. I think they're very important. If you look on the right-hand side there, you can see some of those numbers. Again, in my presentation, I'm looking at, they're very hard to see. But I just wanted to show you that, again, while Kentucky doesn't lead the nation overall in acreages planted, I do think we have a very, very strong program here in Kentucky. If you apply to grow hemp, I won't go through the whole process about what you have to do or whatever, but on your application, you have to submit a criminal background check. I think some of your literature states that those are things that are probably going to happen in Illinois as well. You have to give them the GPS coordinates, so where your fields are going to be planted. You have to do many, many other things in terms of reporting, planting dates, harvesting dates. You have to allow law enforcement on your property at any time with no summons or search warrant or anything like that. If you're growing hemp, then you're going to allow them to come on your farm whenever they show up at your farm gate. So lots of things make this very interesting, to say the least. This is something from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, one of the slides they use. As a grower, you've got to complete the application. I thought this is kind of interesting right here. You have to exhibit some farming experience. You have to have an IRS Schedule F, a farming schedule if you're doing your taxes. You have to have a farm serial number or demonstrate you've done 1 year of full-time work on a farm, or you have to have a BS in agriculture. You only need one of those, but you got to have one. And the reason they're doing that is because they're trying to avoid people sending in an application where it might say on there, yeah, I'm going to plant some industrial hemp. I'm going to grow it in my basement. I'm going to grow like 6 pots in my basement. That's what they're trying to avoid there. Or I'm going to grow it on my back deck. I'm going to have some tomato pots and I'm going to grow 12 plants on my back deck. So they're trying to alleviate those kinds of applications and kind of stem the tide before it gets started. So just something kind of interesting there. So these are some 2017 numbers for growing hemp in Kentucky. Again, we grew 7.5 million, or 7.5 million was paid to growers, almost 25.5 million of capital investments, almost 100 full-time jobs, and $16 million in gross sales. So that's not great, but it's quite a little bit. We're excited about that. I'm sure 2018 will see those numbers increase quite dramatically. Now, this is kind of what everybody's looking for. Again, if you look at under these numbers, you'll see preliminary analysis. This is 2017. This is some average numbers, but about 20 growers grew grain, about 14 fiber, and then over 100 did the floral. You can see the acres planted, the acres harvested. Again, quite a bit of difference there. And then the yield per acre, okay? 518 pounds of grain, 2,500 pounds of fiber, or about 1.25 tons, and then about 1,000 pounds of floral material. And then you can see the prices given there. Again, these are averages, and we know we can do a much better job. We know we can make these numbers bigger and better. One of the biggest hindrances we have in growing industrial hemp right now is the fact that we cannot use any pesticides or herbicides or anything like that. So, we have a lot of problem with weeds. We don't have too often many problems with insects. We do have some problems with birds. We do have some little bit of issue with some funguses, some disease pressure. more so in the greenhouse than we do out in the field. But when we start looking at returns per acre and those kind of things, these are some numbers that are out there. Now, when I look at $7.20 a pound for 1,000 pounds, that's pretty exciting. I always caution farmers when they see these kind of numbers and when they talk to their processors, seller beware, buyer beware, and that if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. So please take these numbers with a grain of salt. These are not, these are not written in stone. And again, when we think about production and the increase in acreages and so forth, I feel certain that this floral material will probably regress, but I can't swear to that. We're still in the very early stages of this crop. Wanted to touch on the farm bill that was passed back in December a little bit. It was signed into law on December 20th. And basically what it says is it removes hemp from the Controlled Substances Act, and that it will no longer be an illegal substance under federal law. If you grow hemp in Kentucky, and I'm presuming when you grow hemp in Illinois, you will still have to be part of a pilot project or a regulatory program, okay? You will have to monitor this crop. You will have to report acreages planted, acreages harvested, varieties planted, and those kind of things. But it does remove it from the Controlled Substances Act, which we hope will open up the doors for some other things that we'll touch on here just momentarily. Now, while the Farm Bill did some things, there are some things it didn't do. And basically what it didn't do is it didn't change the authority of the Food and Drug Administration. You can see under here that Congress explicitly preserved the agency's current authority to regulate products containing cannabis or cannabis-derived compounds under the Federal Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. So this allows the FDA to continue to enforce the law to protect patients and the public while providing potential regulatory pathways. So the bottom line is, according to federal law, it is still illegal to grow CBDs, okay? But in many states like Kentucky, it is illegal to grow marijuana. It's illegal to grow marijuana in all states federally, but many states have enacted legislation that allow for the use of marijuana either recreationally or medicinally. But on the federal level, it's still illegal. On the federal level, it is still illegal to produce and sell CBDs, okay? But there's a tremendous amount of it out there, and it's being sold over the counter each and every day. If you go to any health food store, if you go to People's, you go to Kroger, any place, you'll see it. It's out there. Health food stores and those kind of things. So anyway, it's out there. But if the FDA comes out tomorrow and says it's illegal and you cannot do it, then there'll be a lot of turmoil, to say the least. So I'm going to talk a little bit about establishment and some things that we're going to do for planting and what we've learned here in Kentucky. So key to success is establishment. Soil moisture planting is very, very critical. Touch on that. I've got some slides here about some of the history and all that. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but hemp has been around for thousands of years. Up until even World War II, it's primarily grown for fiber and the rope that it produced and so forth. It is a summer annual. It has to be planted. Has to be planted annually. Very strongly photosensitive. A variety that we might plant here in Kentucky would be a variety that might not do well in Illinois. And so it's very critical that you get something that will work, for your location in Illinois. For instance, Northern Illinois would probably not be planting the same varieties that you would plant in Southern Illinois. So very, 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 very strong in that regard. We've already talked about the different compounds, the components that we grow. The main two fibers that we're looking for are the bast and the hurd. You can see on the left-hand side the real stringy outer fiber, the bast fiber. You can see on the right we have a lot of the woody inner core called the hurd or the sheaves. These have many, many different applications, and we're very fortunate in Kentucky that we have one of the largest fiber processor in the country. And again, these stringy outer fibers, we see a lot of the artisan processors using these to make handbags, ball caps, shirts, slacks, purses, handbags, you name it. And again, these woody fibers are used for building materials, plastics, and those kind of things. If you've got a Coleman cooler or something like that, these fibers could very well be in that. The lining on your car, the dash of your car, could be have some of these woody hurd fibers on the inside. When we're growing it for fiber, again, we want to choose a variety that's selected for that. We want to make sure we plant it, on the right dates. We do not want to give it too much fertilizer. Again, we're not trying to produce that grain, and so we don't want to produce a lot of energy in that seed head. We have different we're not sure what the best practices are for harvesting this. We want to cut it with a sickle bar, and then we want to let it lay out there and ret for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. I always tell Kentucky farmers that that's something that's different from the people that have been making hay here in Kentucky. When we cut hay down in Kentucky, the number one thing we try to do is get it up quickly so it doesn't get rained on. Hemp is totally different. We want to let it sit out there. We want to let it get wet. We want to let it dry, get wet, dry. We want the sun to hit it. We want that process to break those bonds that adhere those fibers together so that we can separate them once we get it in a bale and get it to the processing plant. This is typically what we do. We'd cut it with a sickle bar mower, let it lay out on the ground, and then we'd bale it up. When we plant our fiber, we typically plant it with a grain drill like you would see here. We planted about 60 pounds per acre, and then we would put it in a big package. We might put it in a mid-sized square bale like you see here, or some of our farmers would put it in round bales. And so lots of opportunities there. This is some old decortication that would have been done, back in the early 1900s and that kind of thing. You can see the inner hurd lying on the ground there. Again, some more of that processing and so forth. So when we talk about yield and money on fiber, we're looking at approximately about 1 ton to maybe 5.5 tons of dry matter per acre. This is a range of prices from our processors here in Kentucky. Again, this is a Kentucky Department of Agriculture slide. It can be used as a single fiber crop, or we could do dual purpose. Again, here's talks about some of the returns and so forth. So again, this is a KDA slide, and it just gives folks an opportunity to think about what they want to do if they want to do fiber. Grain, many uses for the grain. Take me all day to even talk about those. But when we talk about growing the grain, we want to use different variety than we did for fiber, obviously. Fiber, we're looking for maximum yield. So we want a very tall plant, 12 to 14, 15 foot tall. When we're looking for grain, we want something that's much shorter in stature that could be harvested with a combine. It might combine wheat or beans. Again, we're going to be very careful about the selection of the variety, the planting date and latitude and so forth. We're going to be trying to put on more fertilizer because, again, we're trying to produce that grain. When our county agents send in a soil test for growing hemp, we recommend that they use corn as the projected crop so that we make sure we have enough fertility under it. And again, we're going to harvest that at maturity just like we would any other grain crop. Hemp seed varies a great deal in size. If we have a large seed, we would have almost 20,000 pounds of seed per acre, as you can see there. And if we have a very small seed, we'd have almost 3 times that. So it varies a great deal in size. I was talking with a farmer from Iowa the other day, and he was saying, if I grow the grain, will it go through the slits in the bottom of my grain bin? And I was like, well, I really can't answer that. I said, if you've got some of the larger seed where there's only about 20,000 pounds of seed per acre, then maybe not. But if you've got some of their smaller seed, then it might very well do it. And so if you're talking about planting rates, if you're talking about planting 20 pounds to the acre for maybe grain versus 60 pounds an acre for fiber, you can see that there's a great deal of difference in the amount of seed you'd be putting out per acre. So just something there that's kind of interesting that we take into consideration when we're planting different varieties here. Again, you can see them combining some of the grain right here and so forth, harvesting some grain in some of the older pictures. Again, a KDA slide here about yield and so forth. Maximum, one farmer got about 1,600 pounds per acre. I think, again, if you remember, our average from the previous slide was about 580. So I think if we can get between 800 and 1,000 pounds right now, I think we're doing good. I do think that'll go up. I think as we get better genetics and so forth, I think that as we go forward, 1,200 pounds, 1,500 pounds, 1,600 pounds or more is very attainable. And then certainly if we get some weed control and that type of thing, I think that will be better. Cannabinoids, CBD, Charlotte's Web is kind of what kicked this thing off. You can look this up online. Charlotte Figi is the young girl's name. She was having many, many seizures. I won't go into all the details there, but this is kind of what flipped the switch for cannabinoids, CBD oil and that kind of thing. It's worth looking at. We here in Kentucky have not done a lot of research yet on the CBD side, just simply because of the ambiguity of CBDs and the sales of CBDs and that kind of thing. We are going to be doing more of that this year. But the people that have been doing this have basically been using anecdotally some marijuana production methods. And that may or may not change, again, depending upon what you're doing. We're not sure about planting methods, fertility, harvesting methods, and so forth. We know different companies that process CBDs are asking their producers to plant it in different models. They're asked to harvest it in different models and so forth. So we will be doing some of that this year, but we have not done a lot of that in the past. A lot of people say that's where the money is. I always caution farmers on that. This is, again, a KDA slide where we're looking at some production yields, approximately 1 pound of dried floral material for one plant. KDA reported, if you will, that some people are paying as high as $1,000 per pound for dried material, but that those prices continue to decline rapidly. Right now, we're somewhere between $5 and $10 per pound. And again, that will change. You can see this is a model, a tobacco model, where they're hanging it in the barn and drying those plants down before they process and extract the compounds of CBDs and so forth. Some people are hand picking those unfertilized female flowers, and some people are actually chopping it like you might chop corn silage. I've got just a few slides coming up here of some of the work that's going on here. Again, a picture's worth 1,000 words. We usually prepare it in prepared seed beds. We find that to be the most productive. Some people have tried no-tilling. There has been some moderate success with that. But in actuality, we believe that right now, the prepared seed bed is the way to go. 6 weeks after seeding, you can see Dr. Williams here. Again, it's up to his shoulders or higher. And so it's a very rapidly growing plant. Again, about 18 weeks, you can see you have a fully mature plant with seed heads on it. When this thing got started, I mentioned all the interest in industrial hemp and how everybody knew a little something about the plant. We heard and we continue to hear that, oh, you can plant it anywhere. Oh, it doesn't have any problem with insects. It doesn't have any problem with disease. It doesn't have any problem with weeds. Well, that, in fact, is not true. We do have some insect issues, not big ones yet, but we have some Japanese beetles, some June bugs, and we see some aphids on there from time to time and some other things, but not enough to cause a lot of economic damage at this point in time. But as we grow more and more of this product, more and more insects will become adept at having their way with it. We don't see much disease out in the field. Where we do see some disease issue is primarily in the greenhouse, problems with pythium and so forth. But again, we're working on that. Our plant pathology group is doing quite a bit of work with that. This is a slide that I won't read it to you, but I wanted to just show you that within the College of Agriculture, Food and Environment here at the University of Kentucky, we're involved in multi-department levels in terms of researching this crop. Myself and Dr. Williams are on the agronomy side. We have people in molecular biology, biosystems, and ag engineering are looking at, harvesting equipment, that type of thing. Horticulture people are getting a lot of questions about growing it in greenhouses. Agricultural economics, our econ folks are looking at some different models. We'll have those probably posted on our website here within about a month and so forth. Again, we do multi-university research projects, and we now have a multi-state project that is established. It just came online here shortly, a few weeks ago. Just some finola planted. Again, that looks like a very good crop there. This is Dr. Paul Woosley at Western Kentucky University. We do some collaborative work with him on weed control there and so forth. Harvesting some plots at the thing. I've got some yield trials in here. You can see on the right the varieties. You can see the yield. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through those. You'll have these in the presentation. This seed is very high in oil. You can see roughly about 30% of it is oil. You can see the different varieties there at the bottom. I don't know about in Illinois, but in Kentucky, we have a lot of dove shoots come September. If you want to have a dove shoot, plant you some hemp because they love these seeds. They're very, very high in oil, and they attract a lot of birds. This is, again, just a breakdown a little bit more on the oil side, some of those things that are within it. Again, the different varieties across the bottom, the omega-3s, the omega-6s. My cardiologist tells me those are good things to have, and so that's good. Again, just some more charts. I won't spend a lot of time and go over that, but yield for dual purpose, where we're looking at grain, we're looking at plants per acre, and then dry matter yields. We also have this 2018 data on our website that I showed you early on. Some row spacings there. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I have this slide in here just as kind of a little anecdotal thing. You can see that we have our plots here in the middle. We have actually some hemp and actually some canaf in there, and you can see that our borders are done with corn, okay? You can see that, and in one of the first presentations that Dr. Williams did, and he showed this slide, he said, we use corn for our border. Now, we don't do that anymore. We actually use teff, but originally we were using corn, and at one of the meetings, a couple of the farmers were in the front row, and one of them kind of poked the other one in the ribs with his elbow and said, look, they had theirs with corn too. So not sure what they were talking about there, but we don't use that anymore, but I thought that was pretty cute. Again, another slide of some of the fiber there. We did have some canaf in some of these, so be very careful. This is one of the tobacco models where we can plant using the tobacco setter, again, planting 4 rows at a time there. The nice thing about this model is you can actually use cultivation on this to get those plants up and established and get them covering that row to help with weed suppression. Again, you can use plastic, much like you would for strawberries or maybe tomatoes. And then some people are actually just, using a grain drill and doing that. So again, lots of different models out there on ways to establish this crop. We're also looking at the possibility of doing some ensiling for forage to feed to livestock, primarily cattle. But we're also looking at this as possibly a way to store material, and then after we've kept it so long, bring that out and see if we've got any loss in the CBDs and other cannabinoids through the ensiling process. So Again, something new that we're working on there. Again, just a little bit more about ensiling and some of the things we're doing on that. So I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly here, leave us a few minutes for questions. I know you all have had some questions. I see them on the side as I go through. I haven't really been paying a lot of attention, but as I look at this and been working with this crop now for a little over 3 years, as far as my participation goes, is one of the things that I think we're going to have here in Kentucky and continue to have is the regulatory program. We have a great regulatory program here in Kentucky. We're going to have to continue to have that. States that have legal marijuana, both recreational and medicinal, it might not be as crucial, but for us, it's absolutely mandatory. We're going to have this program. It's very cumbersome for farmers. Farmers are used to planting a crop, putting it out there, and spraying it for weeds, and then coming back and checking on it later. We certainly can't do this with this crop. We have to continue this program for some time to come. We need a tremendous amount of work in plant breeding. If you look at those plants in the lower picture and even on the right one there, you see that plants are all different sizes. And when you drive through the state of Illinois this summer, when you look at a cornfield or a bean field, you will see that every plant in that field is roughly, within centimeters, the same height, whether it's corn or beans, they're all the same height. And if you look on those individual plants, the reproductive parts on those plants are within a very narrow window on that stalk. And I realize beans kind of go up and down the whole stalk, but corn, those ears are in a very finite area for the ease of harvesting. And so when it comes to hemp, we need that kind of research to get our plants more even in the field. We just had an announcement came out last week that in collaboration with UK and one of our local processors, that they've actually come up with a 0% THC. So that work is ongoing. But again, we need to get this plant breeding, a lot of work done on that. Pesticides, again, right now we can put nothing on the crop. There's nothing labeled for it. I do think now that the Farm Bill has passed and it's taken it away as a Class 1 narcotic, then I think we'll see some of those maybe come online. I know there'll be some work done to maybe get some temporary labeling on that, but that would be a tremendous help for us. Harvesting and storage, lots of work needs to be done there. If you harvest the grain, you absolutely positively, have to put it under air and you have to mix it. When you harvest hemp grain, there's a lot of green material in it. The seed doesn't all mature at once, like maybe on an ear of corn. If you harvest that grain when it's about 75% mature, which is what we recommend, because if not, you'll see a lot of shatter. It'll fall on the ground. You've got so much green material in there that you absolutely positively have to get it under air and moving. You can't just put air under it because the air will pocket and you'll have big clumps of mold in there, which is obviously no good. So a lot of work to do on that harvesting and storing. Economics, I mentioned that briefly just a few minutes ago. If it doesn't make money, then it doesn't make sense. So we've got to make sure that our economics are there. Financial backing up until now. Basically, if you wanted to borrow money to produce a hemp crop, you had to put up the collateral to the bank in order to get some production cost secured. We think maybe now that will change a little bit as this changes. Again, we've got the Farm Bill. Provided the FDA doesn't come down hard, then we'll get some for those production models with CBD material. So we're hoping for more financial backing for farmers. And then contracts between farmers and processors. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, you absolutely have to say on your application who you're going to process your hemp, and then you have to work with that processor to secure getting them that material. I use the example of, if I'm working with a processor and I tell him that I'm going to grow 100 acres of hemp, for grain, and that I'm going to get 1,000 pounds of grain per acre, then I'm going to have 100,000 pounds of grain to sell to him. He's agreed to pay me $1 a pound. So he's going to give me $100,000 for my grain. He, on the other hand, goes out and secures 9 other growers because he needs 1,000,000 pounds of grain for his end user. So he makes a contract with his end user to supply 1,000,000 pounds of grain. I plant my 100 acres and I do a poor job, or weather conditions aren't right, or whatever happens, and my crop is a failure, then all of a sudden I can't produce the 100,000 pounds of grain that I told him I would. So is that my responsibility? Do I have to pay him? Does he still owe me for some of my production costs? How does he come up with the additional 100,000 pounds to make sure he gets it to his end user? And so these contracts are going to have to continually be fine-tuned, and so that we can spread some of that risk out, as we go forward. So, it's a very interesting thing. Lots of things. Again, we've just been exploring this now for about 5 years. We do not have all the answers. We don't even have all the questions yet. So we're still learning to do that. There's my contact information. Again, I know some of you have already talked to Dr. Williams. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, we have quite a few questions that rolled in, and we'll try to get to all of them. And I just want everyone to know that if the time to answer these questions goes over the 1 p.m. mark and you have to get off the call, that's fine, but we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and we will really try to get to them, but we have a few here that might stimulate some good discussion. And I tried to answer a few of them in the chat box, Tom, but we'll get your take on these and some clarifications of some of the things you said. So the first one that came in was, can you use the plant for more than one use? And I seem to indicate that there were dual use varieties, but it's best to use the end product specific varieties, if at all possible. And the question, the second, or do you have something you want to comment on that?
No, I just, we get that question at virtually every meeting, and, we do have dual purpose varieties out there and so forth, but, because we're so young at this and so new at this, I usually try to encourage people to pick one and try to do that and try to do it well and get that under their belt. And then if they want to do a dual purpose, say a year or two in, then I think they're going to be a lot more prepared and more equipped to do that than just starting to try to do dual purpose right out of the gate.
Okay. The next question was, what does the market look like in Kentucky for businesses specifically growing the transplants for CBD farms, or do most growers who produce hemp for CBD grow their own transplants? I indicated that because of the tight control with the 0.3% less of THC content, that most growers probably would be having tight control over their own transplant production. But you want to comment on that? I know there might be some businesses that are growing transplants for sale, or I'm not sure what that landscape is in Illinois, but what?
Well, we have transplants coming in from other states.
Okay.
We have farmers that work with companies outside of Kentucky, and they'll send their transplants, their clones in here, and the farmers will plant them. You'll see on the slide there, on the plastic there, those could be from Colorado. They could be from another state, but we have both. But we do have quite a bit of material coming in from other states.
Okay. And then let's see here. So there was a question that came up, and we had a little discussion in the chat box about it, about that you made the comment about CBD still technically being illegal with under FDA regulations, but is it? And there was the comment came in. I tried to clarify it, that the floral product itself, if it's 0.3% THC or less, is not illegal, but the small scale processing of CBD products could potentially be regulated by the FDA. Does that make more sense, or is that what's?
Well, when that plant is out in the field being grown, and it's under 0.3% THC, then it's a very legal crop. There's no problem with it whatsoever. And when you harvest it and it's still on that level, when it's hanging in the barn or whether it's on the warehouse floor or whatever, that material is still, as long as it falls under that threshold, it's only once it's processed and then put on the shelf that technically it's illegal. But, again, you can find it everywhere. I mean, even if the FDA decides to do something, which I'm not looking for any real harsh thing. If you look at that language, I think they're going to be very open to not try to shut it down. Now, I could be wrong, but whatever they do, you can still order it online and you can have it shipped in from Germany or Italy or Australia or wherever. So,
Right.
But as long as that plant is growing in the field, it's in the warehouse, and it hasn't been processed and on the shelf, then you still have a legal crop.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Okay. So another question, I'm sure we could discuss this for a while, but because of time, we'll move on to some of these other questions. Someone had asked the question about moves by larger corporations like Monsanto and Bayer to use GMO hemp. What's your sort of opinion about the landscape for genetically modified hemp? Is that something that's on those companies' radars?
I think it will probably come. I mean, I do. I mean, I think we've got some other issues, well, again, I come from the agronomy side, but yeah, I mean, I think it's, the capability is there. Obviously, we have the technology to do that. And I mentioned early on that, the technology we have now is going to make this go so much faster than, say, corn back in the, 50s and 60s or something. So, but yeah, I mean, everything's on the table. Like I said, our group is working with some 0% THC. Now, how that will transpire, what will happen with that, I don't know. But it was a big deal. It was a big press release the other day. So, all these molecular biology things, genetics, GMOs, they're all on the table. And, whoever gets to the table first, usually has a leg up, shall we say. So,
okay.
But I'm sure there'll be somebody that will look into that, no doubt.
Okay. So then there was a little discussion, and maybe if you want to clarify or speak to this, someone was mentioning, a participant, that the extraction for CBD that processors like in Colorado, for instance, they're paying for percentage of CBD per pound rather than per pound of dry material, and that actually, in some cases, with the current rates, is pretty high, anywhere from $32 to $50 per pound if per percentage of CBD. Right. Concentration. So the processors are kind of paying slightly different rates than just a flat per dry weight per pound.
Those are just, again, some preliminary numbers that we had there. And, when you're working with a particular processor, each processor is going to structure their contracts differently. They are going to percentage of CBD, I think. And those things are going to continue to evolve. There's no question about that. And again, that price, right now is very lucrative. And when we look at some of our models here, again, if we have success, you can see on the slide there where they've got it on plastic, they can actually mow between those to keep the weeds down and like that. But yeah, depending upon the processor you're growing with, they're going to, when you get a contract with them, they're going to tell you what variety they want or what clones they want, where you're going to get them, if you're going to grow them yourself, if it's going to be under plastic, if it's going to be a single drip irrigation, double drip irrigation, when you're going to put your fertility on, if you're going to top the plant, and then again, are you going to hand harvest it? Are you going to cut the whole plant? Are you going to chop it? So it really depends upon the processor. They pretty much dictate, what your procedures are going to be.
Right. Okay. And then this general question came in, which might be a difficult question for any of us to completely answer, the question about, is it worth it for me to grow hemp on 2 acres? I want to try this out. I have a little hobby farm, so on and so forth. I made the comment that in the current proposed rules that where it may change, that at least in Illinois, the registration fee per non-contiguous area is $1,000 with a minimum of a half acre or a quarter acre in production. So do you have any comments about that, maybe from the Kentucky perspective? I think it remains to be seen whether small scale enterprises like that will be profitable in Illinois. Can you speak to that from the Kentucky perspective?
Well, from our perspective, we do have a lot of processors. Okay, that's one of our great strengths. And we have some small processors, what I call artisan processors, that might be looking for a couple of acres or 5 acres of a particular variety for fiber, for instance, and they work with a smaller farmer, and they have their own little deal that they do, and if that works for them, then great. We also have the issue of the interest that I mentioned very early on. Man, people are interested in this, and some people, when we first started, they were like, you know what? I don't know a lot about this, but I'm interested. I'm curious as heck. I'm gonna plant me an acre or 2 acres. I'm just gonna find out what this stuff's about. And they did that, and it didn't take them long to think like, no, this isn't gonna work. I've got too many weeds. It didn't come up. I planted it too deep. So that curiosity thing might be a little bit of a player early on. But at the end of the day, again, it's got to make money. And then you look at the economies of scale and those kind of things. And so you may start out with some of those 2 acres or 5 acres. I don't think it'll take long to segue to larger acreages. Like I said, I do believe in the end that this will be a commodity crop.
Okay, so we're at the 1 p.m. hour, but we have a few more questions, and we'll go ahead and bring those up to get them recorded here. And this will be on the YouTube channel. So if any of you need to get off, we're just going to keep on plugging along here. The question was brought up: are there any other processing facilities currently in Illinois? And I referenced that there currently aren't any processors that we know of yet. It sounds like there may be some moving in, particularly with, processing some of the floral products, but at least in terms of the bast processing and then food processing, there aren't currently any processors set up in Illinois. That's what I heard so far, but I'm not 100% sure that won't change sooner than later. So the next question is, how many plants per acre are typically grown for CBD? Do you have I don't know if you answered that question or not in your presentation. Typical density.
Yeah, it varies. I mean, I'm really hesitant to say because it just depends on the individual processor and what their plants are. Again, we have some that plant single rows. We have some that do the double rows like you see in this slide here. We could have 5,000 plants per acre. That might be a starting point where you would think if you're doing CBD somewhere around that. And then if you're paying $3 or $4 or $5 per clone, all of a sudden you're talking about $250,000 just in clones to plant an acre. So
it looks like a participant referenced 2,000 to 3,000 as a possible number per acre. So that's something.
Again, if they've got a bushier variety that doesn't get as tall, or if they've got a plant that they want to top it and they want that to kind of branch out and sucker out at the top. So again, it's going to come back to the individual processors and what their farmers have told them, and they've been doing this for 4 or 5 years now, so they have a very good handle on that. Again, I mentioned we've not done a lot of this. We're going to start this year, but these processors, have a much better handle on it than we do.
Okay. Someone asked a question about becoming a processor. The preliminary rules in Illinois, it's the same fee structure as for the production licensing. So it's $100 licensing fee and $1,000 in registration fee, good for 3 years of processing. But that could change. Again, the final rule won't come out until February 11th. So that's at least the minimum at the state level here in Illinois. I'm sure it's probably something similar in Kentucky. Let's get down to a couple questions here. Can you speak to the certified organic hemp grain market at all? Is there any interest or any trends with that?
There is some interest in that. Again, it's not a very big piece of the pie, but there is some interest in that. I know some farmers, have taken the opportunity to say, look, I can't use herbicides on this. I can't use fungicides or anything like that. So I'm going to grow my hemp organically. I'm not going to use chemical fertilizers. I'm going to do mechanical practices and stuff like that. And I'm going to do it that way for 3 years. And then I can go to organic corn or organic beans or organic hay or whatever afterwards. But yes, there is some portion of the market that is organic grain.
Okay, great. The next question is there a resource for CBD extraction? This is coming from a chemist, and what would be the requirements for processing? So I answered the processing question, at least here in Illinois, and I'm unaware of the resources for CBD extraction on that end. Is some of that info linked in the Kentucky Department of Agriculture website, or is that something they'd have to find something elsewhere?
You can check that. Processors, CBD companies are all really very careful right now. Their intellectual properties, and a lot of them are using different extraction methods to extract these compounds. And I'm not just talking about CBDs. There are other cannabinoids within the plant. So they're pretty close to the vest on disclosing a lot of information just because they want to be first to the gate or first to the table. And if they think they have something that's either patentable or unique and that they can, corner the market, if you will, or at least get a bigger piece of the pie, they don't give away a lot of information very easily.
Someone asked the question, are there any fiber processors that will accept fiber from outside of the state of Kentucky? And I don't know if you hinted on this. I remember Dr. Williams discussing that the economics of shipping fiber aren't worth it. You want to comment on that a little bit?
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, you just couldn't go very far out. I think that the company that does it here, the company that I mentioned, I didn't mention the name, but they're the largest processor, and they try to keep most of their material somewhere within between 50 and 100 miles of their location because of those transportation costs and because they do play a significant factor in getting the material to the processor. And I mean, we get this call all the time, we live in such and such state and, we can grow it and we are growing it, but we don't have any processors. Can you process it in Kentucky? And so for hemp and grain, that transportation cost is probably going to be a pretty limiting factor. CBDs, I don't know.
Okay. So this will be the last question. There was some discussion on here that I'm just trying to suss out the questions from the discussion, but this is the last straight up question. In terms of ideal acreage, especially from a grain farm standpoint, what's an ideal acreage to start out on was the question.
Oh, golly. I mean, again,
yeah.
It's just what you're comfortable with. I mean, I certainly wouldn't go out and plant 1,000 acres, the first year. If you're a big grain farmer and you're farming, 5,000 acres of ground or 10,000 acres of ground, and you think, I'm going to do 500 acres or 1,000 acres of hemp, I'd be really hesitant to do something like that. Depending upon the size of your operation, the equipment you have availability and all like that, 100 acres, 200 acres. But again, that's up to the farmer. I'm not going to tell anybody not to plant it. I'm just going to tell them that this is a totally different crop and, just be very careful.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'd really like to thank Tom for his presentation and sharing his expertise and experience with this. I'd like to thank everyone else for joining the webinar. I hope you got some information out of this that might help you make some decisions surrounding hemp in Illinois or wherever you are in the United States. Please look for an email from us for the archived webinar on the Local Foods Small Farm YouTube channel, as well as a short evaluation. We really appreciate your feedback for webinars like this, and we put your comments to use. With that, I want to wish you all a fabulous rest of your day and a good start to the 2019 season.